Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Words, a podcast about the simple and yet very strategic choices that we can make every single day to become the best version of ourselves. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Brown, and as a business consultant and life coach, I have seen over and over and over again in the lives of my family and friends and colleagues and clients that every moment matters, that each choice counts, and that more can happen in 1 minute than an entire month for those who choose every day to execute powerful and positive choices. I am so privileged today to be here with Amy Seiffert, my very dear friend of many, many years. We've actually traveled and done a lot of speaking together, and it's a privilege to be able to have you here on this podcast today. Can you remind us, what are today's 3 words?
Face your fears.
Fear. What a fantastic topic for this podcast. Please do not hit pause or leave this podcast, because who wants to talk about being afraid, right?
Right.
Being afraid is an unsettling feeling. In fact, this is how I would define fear in my own words, that it's this unsettling sense that something damaging or destructive is going to happen to me or others that I love and care for, either as a result of choices or circumstances, prompting within me this desire to either avoid it or act upon it. It's this unsettling sense. I don't think I've ever met a human being, Amy, who has said, wow, I really like this sensation of feeling afraid. Well, maybe that's not true, because I guess when you go out to those haunted houses during the Halloween season, we like that feeling of being afraid. But the reason we like feeling afraid in those situations is because deep down inside we know there's no real danger.
Yeah, there's safety there still.
But in real life, we hate being afraid because we feel like the stakes are high. We feel like something is going to happen that's going to change the trajectory of my life forever. I think we all struggle with fears, but we need to face them.
I know. So what do you do about that? How do you face your fears?
Well, it's interesting. I actually have spoken in a variety of environments about fear and even thinking about my own fears in my life. What's interesting about fear in general is most of the things that we are afraid of are not going to happen. They're just not going to happen. And so part of it is pausing, and we've talked in other podcasts about being fully present and mindful and so forth, but it's pausing long enough to realize, what is the fear? So I kind of go through a 3-step process when I think about fear. The first is to identify the fear. The second is to investigate the fear. And the third, and this may sound a little bit weird, but to incriminate the fear. So first, to identify. It just helps me, if I'm feeling this unsettling sense within me, that could be fear, to actually pause and say, what am I afraid of? What am I actually afraid of? Actually identify the root fear. What is the fear? Secondly, though, is to investigate it. Not just say, okay, I'm afraid of snakes. But walk around that fear. Actually take some time to go around the fear in your mind and look at all the angles and ask yourself, investigate, why am I afraid of this? But then I love this third step, incriminate it. Should I be afraid? Is this really something that I need to be afraid of? To really look at it and say, is it scary? Is it something worth exerting my energy and my emotional stamina? And because I think you would admit, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, when we're really afraid, it just drains life out of us.
Absolutely. Or I scream. I see a spider.
So you're afraid of spiders?
Yeah.
So I was saying snakes. I should have said spiders.
It's fine. Either one.
Yeah, my son Ethan is actually really afraid of spiders, and again, I've had this conversation with him. Let's identify your fear. Let's investigate your fear.
And let's incriminate your fear.
Because I said, what is a spider? What's the worst thing that a spider can do to you? And he's like, it can kill me. I'm like, no, the spiders in our house in Northwest Ohio are not going to kill you.
That's how I feel, though. But I get it.
But I know for you actually have looked at fear in a very unique way, and you've done similar. You probably haven't maybe walked through these steps as I have stated them, but how do you deal with some of the fears and so forth that you do?
Oh, man. I think the thing about fear, I remember reading about fear, this idea that we're trying to protect something if we're feeling afraid. So I'm a mom, I have 3 kids, and if I'm, if a bus is coming at them and I feel afraid, I'm trying to protect my kids. But also, I could be afraid of what I'm going to look at and need to protect my image. And then I need to think, what am I afraid of if my image gets tainted, or if I'm embarrassed, or I'm looking like a fool, so walking through all of that for me. But Yeah, I feel like one of the things that I try to do when I'm facing my fears is radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance.
I know.
Interesting.
It's a counseling term.
Okay.
And I know because I've been to counseling. And so this is really helpful.
Thank you for being transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. But radical acceptance is when you look at your fear or your anxiety or whatever it is that's like, wrestling the insides of you. You think, okay, I'm going to follow it all the way through. If I'm afraid of my husband dying, like that's real, losing my husband. If I'm afraid and I follow it through, what if that happens? What if he dies?
I love Rob. I would hate that.
I would hate it too, right?
Yeah,
and it would be horrible.
Yeah,
But I have to think, could I radically accept that? Would I be okay if that actually happened? Could I radically accept this situation? And the reality is yes, I would be okay. It doesn't mean it wouldn't be the worst. And I would walk through it'd be a valley. But even if I take it one step further personally, the spiritual radical acceptance is where I look at the situation and I say, okay, I have a God who loves me and he will take care of me. If I lose my husband or one of my children, I will be okay.
Yeah.
God will hold me. He'll care for me. I'll be all right.
And that's a real thing because there's actually the three greatest fears that most of humankind are facing, and they've done some interesting research on what are the greatest things that we fear. The first of which is death.
Yep.
The death of ourselves.
Yeah.
More actually the process of dying, like what's it going to feel like, but then also secondly the death of someone we love. The second fear that we battle as a humankind typically is the fear of being alone.
Yeah.
Which for you, what you just described both in one scenario, right? Is the fear of being alone or living life alone or ending life alone is really scary. We love companionship, connection. We talked about that on other podcasts.
Yep.
But also the fear of failure. So let's not talk about death necessarily, though that's a really, at times fearful thing. But even the fear of failure. So often it is this particular fear, this third fear of humankind, that causes us to be immobilized. And to not become the best version of ourselves because we're imagining from this space and this place and this time right now, I'm going to be a failure someday. And so I'm not going to take risks.
Right.
I'm not going to try new things. I'm not going to experiment. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to learn because I'm afraid. Or I'm not going to actually do that thing that I really want to do. I'm not going to try that thing that I really am interested in trying because I am afraid of failure. If I can share even with our listeners, I thought a lot about this because as I work in life coaching, a lot of folks that I'm working with are talking about their fear of failure, And I think that I want to be able to say to every single one of them, do you want to guarantee that you will get to the end of your life and not feel like a failure? Then you need to be failing on a regular basis. It's counterintuitive, but you need to face that fear.
Yeah.
You need to look that fear right in the eye, identify it, investigate it, incriminate it, and say, you know what? I'm not going to get to the end of my life as a failure. But you will feel like a failure, and this is a sad story, if you never take risks and you never are willing to fail, because failure is failing forward. If you learn from that, you can actually grow and develop, but there's so much tied to our self-image and our feeling like what people, like you said, what people think of me and what am I going to think of myself, that we won't try new things and we're just afraid of failing. So, I know that's true for me. I want to succeed. I want people to look at me and say, he was successful. He succeeded. Can you relate to that?
100%.
Okay.
I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, so I don't know if our listeners are familiar with the Enneagram, but that is high accomplishment. I think you might fall into that category
Yep,
too.
I am an achiever. Yep.
Yes, I have that fear all the time, but then I think, but failing is where learning happens. Like, that's just a fact, and I also need to let my children fail so that they can learn. If I'm trying to protect them from failing, they're not going to learn. They're not going to grow. They're not going to hit challenges and be able to overcome a hurdle.
Yeah.
Right? This is where some of my greatest pain points is where I've seen major growth. I'm not going to be afraid of this.
And we're both parents, and so I'm just going to go here because you brought it up, but this idea that oftentimes we are trying so hard and exerting so much energy and emotional stamina to be able to make sure our kids don't fail.
Yeah.
What happens then is our good intentions go bad because our kids are no longer strong.
Right.
They're weak. We've actually clipped their wings. When we don't let them fail, we don't let them try, we don't let them risk, we don't let them get bruised and bloody.
Yes.
I mean, literally, I remember one time when My son Justin, who's so adventurous, was climbing up on this place at the park where he shouldn't have at his age, and my wife said, "Oh, we got to get him down because he's going to break his arm." And I said, "No, he's not going to break his arm." And he fell and broke his arm. So that's kind of an interesting story for another time. He fell and broke his arm, and my wife looked at me and said, "So now what do you have to say?" And I was like, I would say it again because I want him to try. I want him to risk. I want him to fail. And I've even had a really heart-to-heart conversation with my dear wife. And we both obviously love our 9 children amazingly, but one time I just needed to say out loud that it is possible that because we have so many adventurous children who are achievers and are trying new things, that we might actually one day bury one of our children. That there might be a child or two that pass on before us. But just saying it out loud, facing that fear, thinking about that made a huge, huge difference. Can I share with you, Amy? I think there's lies that we believe about fear. And we'll close with this. First of all, that fear is weakness. Fear is not weakness.
Right.
Fear is normal for humankind. It doesn't mean that we're weak. It means that it is what it is. So we are fragile creatures. We are finite. We don't have all the answers. We can't control our lives the way that we would like to. So fear is normal. It doesn't mean that we're weak, but the strength comes out as we face our fear. Secondly, that fear is negative. It's not negative. If I'm walking through the woods on a hike with my children, and a bear comes out of the corner of the path and starts chasing us, that fear is really positive right now.
Helpful.
It is not negative. I'm adrenaline, and I should be afraid. But the problem is most of the things that we're afraid of, we shouldn't be afraid of.
Like spiders, is that?
Well, you shouldn't be afraid of spiders. Yes, Ethan, if you're listening, you shouldn't be afraid of spiders. But fear is not negative in all situations. But thirdly, that fear has power. It doesn't have power. Fear only has the power that I give and hand over to fear. And that's really my promise, is to those who are listening today, that fear does not decide. You do. All of our podcasts are about 3-word choices, about the power of choices, and you can choose to not be afraid. Now that may sound crazy, like I can't control. No, let me say it differently. You can't choose not to be afraid, but you can choose to identify, investigate, and incriminate your fears in such a way that over time you will begin to change and you will be less fearful. But also I want to say this. Most of the things that we're afraid of, they're never going to come true.
Right.
And so we're spending energy today about fears and about potential tragedies and difficult circumstances that are never, ever going to be happening. Amy, I think you and I both agree. Life can sometimes be scary.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are fearful things happening all around us. The world is not as it should be or as it was meant to be. And it's a fearful, scary place at times. But we can, as human beings, choose, in 3 words, to face our fears. For life coaching, consulting services, or to hire a keynote speaker, please visit dmbcoaching.com.